without keeping our viewers waiting, let's hear about India's upcoming economic recovery and how investors can make the most of it. So over to you, Nilesh and Arvind.
Thank you, Ghazal. Uh, Very warm welcome to all our viewers attending this webinar. Nilesh, if you can move to the first slide. So we'll talk about what has happened. What has happened in the Indian economy? Is the Indian economy recovering? Is the recovery sustainable? And before that, we'll just see what happened prior to COVID. So this is a very long-term chart, 20-year chart of the Indian GDP. And if you look at the chart, the Indian GDP peaked in 2010. So it's been 10 years of lower and slower growth. As you can see the chart going down. And multiple things have happened post the financial crisis recovery. You saw a very high level of inflation and very high fiscal deficit. And that sort of started the economic downturn. A lot of infrastructure companies put up a lot of capacities, a lot of companies expanded, and which resulted in eventually in a lot of NPAs in the banking system. So banks started disclosing NPAs, credit growth fell down. And then you had multiple shocks. Demonetization was one very big shock to the economy. And we at Quantum believe that Indian economy has still not completely recovered from demonetization. Then you had the 2018 ILFS credit default, which sort of brought in a big amount of risk aversion in the system. And so as you see, multiple things have happened over the years, and the Indian economy has lost its pace. The average annual growth rate of 6.5–7% has slowed down. And before COVID itself, the GDP growth had gone down below 4%. So this is the scenario in which the Indian economy entered COVID. Nilesh, next slide. So if you look at countries which grow from low income to middle income to high income, so look at Japan in the 60s and the 80s, Korea in the 80s to 2000s, China in the 90s to 2010s. They've all had two basic ingredients to drive their growth. One was investment. So they invested in infrastructure, ports, airports, roads, electricity, manufacturing. And they also had an export market. So their own domestic market was not that big. So they focused on exports, and much of their incremental growth came from exports. India also, if you see the chart, followed that pattern where investments to GDP ratio went up. Exports to GDP also in India went up to almost 25%. But over the last, again, the same period, over the last 10 years, you've seen investment to GDP coming down, which means companies and households and even the government have reduced their expenditure on investments and infrastructure. And we've also lost out on global export markets. Either the global export markets have itself shrunk, or other countries have taken advantage over India, and India has exported, being able to export lesser as a percent of GDP. And this is very, very important. India needs to ensure that the investment rate and the export rate goes up so as to have a sustainable long-term GDP growth of 6.5–7%. If we can't achieve that, we end up into a situation where we are right now, where the GDP growth is well below India's potential. Next slide. Many of you might have seen this table. This came out about a week and a half back. India's per capita income being compared to Bangladesh, a lot of who and hi in the media. The government replied saying that this is not a valid comparison. But what it actually tells you is that in terms of consumption, so we may have a billion and a billion plus people, 130 crore is our population, but we don't have that kind of consumption. So if you break up the entire Indian population, the top 20 to 30 crore people out of the 130 crore people are people who have high income, savings, and what we call disposable income. So after having saved and did the basic spending, they have money to go and spend on other items. They buy a two-wheeler, they can buy a four-wheeler, they can spend on vacations, so on. So they have disposable income to spend. The next 70 to 80 crore population is essentially subsistence. So they earn just enough to ensure that they can meet their basic needs of dal, roti, kapda, as we've called it before. And and if the economic growth is good, then they get more opportunities. They're employed for the entire year. They get more incomes, and some of them move from that 70-80 crore bracket of subsistence into that 20 to 30 crore bracket where they have extra income to save and consume. And this is what propels GDP growth. The last 20 to 30 crore people are essentially poor. They are dependent on the government for even their day-to-day food and day-to-day living. So this is the reality of the Indian economy. We are a billion people, but we are not billion consumers. And the point that I'm making is India cannot rely only on consumption as a percent of GDP, which is about 60%, to drive economic growth. The income base itself is not that high to continuously have a very high long-term 6.5%, 7% growth. India needs the one that we saw in the previous slide, higher investments in infrastructure, higher manufacturing capabilities, and a higher export share to be able to propel that, gain that income, and then as more people have more incomes and their ability to consume increase, this per capita income increases, and that's how long-term sustainable growth comes about. For all those who have heard quantum over the last 15 years, if anyone who has asked us one question saying that what is the risk to India, what is the risk to the India growth story, and the answer is jobs. We've always said this, that India needs to be able to create jobs for its young population. So 130 crore people, out of that we are a very young country. Many millions get educated and are coming out in the workforce and are looking for a job. And if the economy is not able to create and develop and give those jobs, and the right kind of jobs with the right kind of income and wages, then we could have a social problem. And so that this is the biggest risk that India carries. So the demographic dividend of younger people, more active, productive workforce can actually become a curse if there are not enough job creating abilities that the economy develops. So today people may have a job, but they are either working in a farm where they're not getting paid enough, or they have a job which has got nothing to do with their education. So we have to get both things right in terms of job creation and also education appropriate enough for the job that you get. And this is a big challenge, and we still haven't seen one common document by the government saying that this is our job policy. This is what we will do to create jobs. And successive governments, not this, prior to this also, we haven't seen that one policy framework which will enable more job creation, and so that the social problem that we fear in India does not happen. Complicated chart, but the reason I've put it is for two reasons. As you saw in the previous 2-3 charts where the GDP growth has come down, at Quantum we've always held that India's long-term GDP growth is about 6.5 to 7%. We never believed in the 8-9% that was touted about during 2005 and 2007, that India's birthright is to grow at 9% after Goldman Sachs put India as part of the BRIC economies. And we don't believe in the 3-4% target. And we've over the years we've held on to the belief that India can and still can grow at 6.5% GDP, real GDP over a long period of time. And we used two very simple metrics. One was India has a 30% savings ratio, and there is something called incremental capital output ratio. So if you do 30 divided by that 4.5, India will get about 6 to 6.5% growth just by using their internal savings. If the policies are good, if you are able to attract long-term capital from foreign investors and foreign and FDI, that growth rate will keep moving up. But as we've seen in the last 3-4 years, we've seen that growth going down. And as I mentioned, there are some structural problems that India has to face and account. And because of that, and because of COVID, we believe that the potential growth of India, at least in the near term, between FY22 and FY25-26, may have actually fallen below 6%. Now, if you would have told anybody that India will not even grow at 6% in 2007, they would have laughed at you. And people laughed at us when Quantum used to go out and say that the long-term potential of India is 6.5. But not anymore. Expectations itself has come down. And I'll show you in later slides why this growth number matters. Why are we so, growth is not the GDP is not the only thing, but why is it so important in terms of returns and markets? This is a very basic table where we lay down why growth matters to investing. So look at equities. So we say that the long-term GDP growth is 6.5%. We add 5% inflation, you get 11.5% nominal GDP growth. If the GDP growth is taken as a sales number, so a typical company will also grow at the pace of the economy, which is at say 11.5%. If revenues are equal to profits, then profits of companies, of those typical companies, will grow at 11.5%. The stocks that most mutual funds buy or most investors buy are typically part of the index, better managed companies, better governed companies, more productive, have reasonable balance sheets to take care of. They should grow at a faster pace than the overall economy. So you add another 2% to that. So you get 13.5%. And then if you are a good investor and you can manage investments on your own very well, or if you give it to a fund management company which has research and investments and philosophy and process, they should be able to beat the normal market return also. And so you add another 100%. I'm not saying this is what it is, but this is how you get and make market expectations. So if for example, people assume 9% GDP growth, and because of that, their expectation of equities was 20%, they would have been disappointed because equity markets have not given that kind of return. At the same time, in the 80s and the 90s, when the GDP growth was 4%, the expected returns from Indian markets was 10, 11%. And as GDP growth has increased, your expected return from equities has increased. That's one reason why growth matters. So higher the growth, the higher the chances of you making more returns in equities and investing. Next slide. But if you look at over the last 5 years, so look at the red line. That is the indexed line of EPS, which is the earnings per share of all the companies in Sensex. So it's been a flat line, which basically says that companies in the Sensex on a weighted average basis have not seen any increase in earnings. But if you look at the green line, which is the Sensex has gone up over this period. So what essentially has happened is the purple line, which is the price to earnings ratio, has gone up, which means when you are investing where there is no increase in profitability in earnings, you are dependent on somebody else to give a higher valuation to those companies for a sustained period of time to be able to make returns. And that valuation is a function of many things. People might be gung-ho on India. Global liquidity is very high and they can give higher earnings and higher prices. At the same time, if there's any global economic shock like COVID, and you can have a big cut down. So if you do not have the support of high growth and high earnings, you're dependent on market liquidity, market sentiment to drive returns. What happens when growth falls? If over the last 7-8 years, you've seen so many companies defaulting. And one major reason for them defaulting is that they have assumed a certain level of growth, which has not come about. For that growth, they have invested, they have taken on debt. And because the growth hasn't been high, they've not been able to service that debt. They're not able to grow their profits and sales, and eventually have defaulted. ILFS, DHFL, Amtech, you can name, and there are thousands of other companies which are not even known, which have defaulted to banks. So when growth rates go down, you get an increase in default rates. Companies not surviving or going under, that level increase. And this also played out in many of you who would have seen or invested in debt funds and credit funds had defaults. The primary reason for that was that the growth itself was low and corporate India was not in a strong position as it was in the previous decade. So that's another risk that comes about by growth when you have lower growth. The other thing is many of us have investments in fixed income. So all of us have investments in fixed deposits. And when growth goes down, you always see the central bank cutting interest rates. And over the last 1.5 years, they've cut interest rates very sharply. And returns from fixed deposits have gone down from the 7.5%, 8% to 5 to 6%. And it may actually go down even lower even further. So when growth is low, you also have to lower your return expectations from your fixed income investments. That's another impact of low growth. So in that background, in that slowdown, low investments, low exports, breakdown in consumption, credit crisis, demonetization, and India may have recovered a bit from that, and then you had COVID. So this slide just shows the impact that we saw in the first quarter, that is the April to June 2020, where we had among the strictest lockdowns in the whole world. But what it also will do is that most estimates and our own estimates are that for the entire year of FY21, and which is April 22 March 21, the GDP growth will be minus 10%, and we expect it to increase by about 9%, 9.5% in FY22. What that means is that over the next 2 years, your GDP growth will just about come back to what it was in FY20, which is March 20. So you've lost 2 years of GDP growth, which means incomes, which means consumption. Effectively, the Indian economy would have lost 2 years, and it will take some time to come out of it. A, because it's a big shock, and B, because of the historic precedent that we came about, that the slowdown was already well entrenched, and on that we had COVID. So the recovery is going to be, we are seeing some recovery. I'll show you slides on that, but it will be delayed. We still think, and we've been writing and talking about this, that the government support to the economy has been much lower than required. We estimate that the impact of investment and consumption would be about around 10% of GDP. But if you look at the government spending, how much the government is spent on giving people income, guaranteeing wages, spending on food, they've done it, but it's still much lower than what is required. So this is another reason why even when the recovery happens, India may have slower recovery than other markets where we've seen the government spending a lot more to protect people's income and protect people's consumption. And we will talk about a bit in detail in the Q&A. I'm pretty sure we'll get some questions on this. So given all these, we still think that there is recovery, but a sustainable recovery. And when I'm saying sustainable, is whether India will go back to that 6.5%, 7% sustained real GDP growth year on year. I think that will take time. As these charts shows, investment intentions, investment announcements have kept going down, which is corporate India not investing in new capacity, and credit growth, which is another factor of which drives growth, has also been in single digits for some time. So we think that recovery will take time. We also see two risks on the horizon. We saw an increase in fiscal deficit in after the financial crisis of 2008, and post that we had a macro stability problem in India. This year also we'll see a similar thing where the fiscal deficit to GDP at the center and state level will be almost in double digits, about 12% of GDP. And how India recovers from that high debt will take time. And the other thing is inflation. Even though we have seen a slowdown, we've seen inflation. So if you look at this, the right chart, the RBI kept interest rates well above inflation. Well, so the blue line has always been above the orange line over the last 4-5 years. But over the last 1 year, that's not been true. Inflation has gone above and the repo rate has been lower. If the expectation is that the inflation will come down, but if it doesn't, then RBI will have to hike interest rates, which will kind of have another impact on how sustainable the recovery is. There's some good news on COVID. At least in the last month, we've seen a decrease in the daily cases. Testing rates have gone up. The percentage infection rates are also low. Recovery rates have been higher. So India, maybe we might have just seen that the first wave that we are still on has kind of peaked. So that's a good sign. Next slide. But if you look at US and Europe, they are now what are in what we call the second wave. So we need to be careful in terms of opening up too much or just declaring victory over COVID. Those countries had very low cases, and over the last 1.5 months, they've seen a significant increase in cases. So we need to be careful. In terms of activity, we are seeing normalizing. So certain industries, electricity, exports have actually gone above the pre-COVID level. Certain industries are still lagging. Next slide. So it's some as I said, some industries have recovered completely. Exports, railway fleet, electricity, whereas imports is lower also because domestic demand is lower, and also India's import out of tariffs. There is a big issue against importing from China, so even that might be causing a slowdown on imports. But the recovery is happening, but it's in parts. We've seen a significant increase in auto sales, tractors especially. Given the activity in rural India, that's been a big support. Good monsoons, good crop, lot of activity by the government. So, and we've seen an increase in auto sales. We're also seeing e-way bills, which is an indication of goods moving within the country, has also come back to pre-COVID levels. Another sign of that near-term economic indicators are normalizing. I'll now hand it over to Nilesh, who will talk to you about what does this mean for corporate India and how are equity markets pricing in and what should we expect?
Thank you so much, Arvind. Arvind gave a great perspective on the macroeconomy and where it's headed. I'll just focus on what it means for the markets and where do we see markets going, sort of moving on with the COVID crisis. So, I mean, rightly, so you see a very sharp cut in estimates for FY21 because the crisis itself was a black swan event. Nobody factored that. Generally, as Arvind showed, last 5-6 years has been very weak for corporate earnings. And point to point, there has been very very low single-digit growth from FY14 to FY20 CAGR earnings growth. Our sense is FY21 numbers will probably take a very sharp nosedive. Corporate earnings will get back to probably FY18 levels and even lower. FY22, as Arvind said, the economy is expected to get back to FY19 levels or sorry, FY20 levels. So you might, rough cut, you might sense that the FY22 earnings will get back to FY20 before the COVID crisis hit. So that is sort of a benchmark in our minds when you're looking at corporate earnings. Can they get back to their earnings number, which was 2 years ago, by FY22? So, I mean, markets have sort of ignored all that earnings cut. Right? So they've continued to rally despite all the shocks of earnings that we are seeing, especially the COVID earnings shock. And we are now very close to all-time high. So the Sensex and the Nifty are within 5. Because the market remains very, very optimistic despite. There has been a series of events, right? We've seen demonetization, IL&FS bankruptcy, and the markets have shrugged off all of that. And the biggest one has been the COVID impact. And again, we are back to all-time highs. There's a reason the markets are ignoring all these negative shocks and they continue to. Central bankers have been very, very active, especially after the global financial crisis, which was a big shock. Monetary policy has been very, very loose. And since then, monetary policy has continued to remain loose, which is what is driving asset prices around the world. And the kind of loose monetary policy that we've seen after the COVID crisis has been unprecedented. And that is why, despite the sharp shock to corporate earnings, you're seeing a big rally in equity markets. So what are central bankers trying to do here? So essentially, their objective is to lower the cost of capital. So asset prices are priced relatively. So if there is a certain benchmark of risk-free rate, other asset classes then add a premium to that to determine their own rate of return. So what the central bankers are trying to do is trying to lower the risk-free rate so that money which is lying in savings account now earn a lower return. Hence, people are forced to spend, which drives economic activity. And also projects which don't meet a certain return threshold, now because the cost of capital is lower, start meeting the return threshold, and you see greater investments in the economy because now they are making higher than the cost of capital, which is a lot lower. Now that is theory, but in real life, what happens is a lot of that money does not typically get spent. You see that money being flowing into asset prices, and because the cost of capital is very, very low, even with a lower rate of return in investments, your willingness to buy assets, risky assets especially, goes up, which is what has happened in equity markets. And you're seeing a massive re-rating of price to earnings multiple, despite earnings being remaining very weak. So the entire rally from 2016 has been driven by essentially P re-rating, not so much earnings cycle. As you saw, the earnings has hardly moved over the last 4 or 5 years, but the price to earnings has moved up. And a lot of it is primarily related to very loose economic or monetary policy, which is driving up asset prices and driving up price to earnings ratio. The price to earnings ratio in recent times is also impacted because the Q1's earnings drop has been very, very sharp for India because of the lockdown. But even adjusted for that, the Sensex P is about 25 times FY20 earnings, which did not have a significant impact. We just had a week of lockdown impact there. So that is a good benchmark to have. Our sense is FY22 earnings will be very close to FY20 number. We are trading somewhere close to 25 times FY22 earnings, which is substantially higher than the long-term averages for forward earnings for Sensex. The trailing earnings average has been just under 19 times. So even compared to that, we are probably close to 2 standard deviations above where we see the long-term P for the index. So what it means is equities are no longer cheap. In the month of March and April, we were very, very bullish on equities. We in a lot of webinars and our writings, we suggested investors to go overweight equities. But right now, given where valuations are, we are a lot more careful in terms of recommending allocation to equities. Of course, retail flows after 2014, and Arvind showed that chart where interest rates continue to come down. They were around in 2013. Equity flows into equity, especially from retail investors, has been very, very strong. As fixed income was yielding very low rates, real estate was not going anywhere, and in the backdrop, you saw this equity market rally driven by promises of great reform being unleashed by Mr. Modi. But earnings cycle took a different direction, but flows continue to come to equity markets. And a lot of that money came in at very high levels. And unfortunately, like the Lehman crisis, as soon as the market tanked, a lot of these investors were out of money. What we are seeing now, and what our sense is, that a lot of these people who had seen a sharp drop in their mark-to-market of investments in equities, now because the equities have recovered and they are seeing some amount of level or recovery back to their cost of investment, you are seeing people taking money out and shying away from equities. SIP flows continue to remain steady. That is a silver lining, but you are seeing lump sum redemption. If the markets were to flip or were to correct again, you might see an acceleration of that trend of people withdrawing from equities. So there is a long-term trend where Indians are under-allocated to equities, and we believe over a long-term that allocation will go up. But in the near term, because a lot of the money has come in chasing short-term returns, and if the markets were to correct, you might see an increased outflow from equity markets. Meantime, FIs continue to invest in India. They like the long-term India story. Despite an $8 billion outflow in the month of March, we are still net positive as money has come back into equity markets in India. So even if retail investors were to withdraw, you might see some shield, some kind of protection, with FIs continue to like the India story for the long term. One of the big advantages for the India story is we are dependent on domestic consumption, which has been the linchpin of the India story. And even if the world were to shut down and go into a lockdown again, we are still dependent on the domestic consumer and how it is playing out. So that's a big advantage for the India story. So you might have a second wave in Europe and US, but by and large, if we manage the COVID crisis fairly well in India, and if we don't see a second wave, you might see the Indian economy getting back to some sort of normalcy. See, I mean, there are near-term issues on valuations and demand, but we remain fairly bullish for the long term. So after the global financial crisis, where the world essentially shut down and demand for the developed world collapsed quite badly, the Indian consumers was largely unaffected. And you see key categories across consumption baskets, be two-wheelers or vehicles or cement or home loan outstanding, we've continued to grow at a very high rate. And that is because we are not that connected to the global demand to drive the India story. And second, we are very, very underpenetrated in most of these categories. So if we get back to some sort of normalcy, there's no reason to doubt that over the next decade or so, we will not continue to grow at a decent level. It might be slightly slower than what we experienced historically, but we might get back to our 6.5% GDP growth once things normalize in India. So in terms of where do we see the next few years on the economic recovery and where the Indian GDP is headed, I will give the numbers for the next couple of years where we see a sharp cut this year. of -10% and a recovery next year of FY22, and we'll get back to probably FY20 levels in GDP. One of the big problems in India has been the government policy or stimulus has been very, very weak, and the government response has been sort of fairly confusing. So our sense is over the next the 3 years after that, our sustainable growth rate should probably be below what we've seen historically, not the 6.5%, but probably be between around 5.5% over FY23 to 25. But after that, we should get back to our long-term growth. The sense is once sort of capex cycle gets back and utilization gets back to where it was, and corporates are forced to spend on capex, you will see sort of the normal recovery kick in and Indian GDP getting back to its long-term GDP trend. That is our base case number even now. We continue to believe over a long term we'll grow at 6.5%, but for the next few years where the sustainable growth rate could be slightly lower. If you look at the index earnings, there is a big drop in FY21. Our sense is that number could be even lower than what the estimates are right now. There is a big delta in earnings being factored in FY22 and 23. FY22, of course, there's a low base effect and you will have some sort of recovery as the 2 months of lockdown which we had in FY21 is not there in FY22. But a lot of the recovery in earnings is coming from banking stocks which had gone through a cycle of NPAs. We are slightly a bit more skeptical there. Our sense is there could be another wave of NPA creation and you might see some increased provisioning again coming in. So we think there will be a recovery, but the earnings perhaps will not grow as fast as what the street estimates. I think it will be a bit more muted than where you see earnings being projected right now. You might see further cuts in those earnings estimates for FY22 and 20. I mean, that is near term, but if you look at the long-term trend, the index earnings have grown by about 10 times over the last sort of just over 20 years. We think long-term, there is no reason for Indian nominal GDP not to grow at, again, that 11-12% nominal growth that Arvind projected. And better companies will grow at slightly faster rate than that. And our sense is we will have that delta in earnings again over the next decade and 2 decades. So there could be concerns in near term on earnings growth and valuations, but the long-term story for us at least still remains attractive. So if you're a long-term investor, then you can continue to stay invested and not bother about sort of near-term high valuations or weakness in earnings growth. Currently, if you take the long-term multiple for the Sensex, which is just under 19 times, if you project if you take the earnings number for the index and project the Sensex, it suggests by the end of CY21, we will have roughly about 41,000 index. This is assuming P's get back to their long-term averages, which doesn't leave much upside if you are investing with a view of next 12 to 18 months. We are already at around 40,000 levels. So if you are looking to invest in equities with a short-term view, our advice is to remain fairly cautious. There is not much upside left after the massive re-rating of price to earnings multiples. In terms of how we are positioning our portfolio, the way the rally has panned out, it has been a fairly, very concentrated rally driven by Reliance and IT and pharmaceutical companies. A lot of cyclicals are still available at large discounts to what we've seen them before the COVID crisis hit, which is where we see pockets of undervaluation. We added a lot of these stocks to the portfolio in the COVID crisis in the months of March and April. Again, we had 2 basic criteria. The companies had to have a very, very strong balance sheet to last probably a year of downturn. They had to have large net cash on books and very high pedigree of management to be able to maneuver the crisis. Our sense is because of the crisis, the stronger companies will emerge stronger. Companies which have had cash on the books will use that money to grab market share. And perhaps the weaker players will find it tough to survive and lose market share in this period. So our penchant has, or at least directionally, we have moved towards a lot more quality in the portfolio. We have a large weight in financials and consumer discretionary because that is where valuations have remained a lot more attractive and continue to offer upside relative to other parts of the Sensex or the economy. We stress tested the portfolio, assuming there would be an elongated lockdown. Most of the companies are very, very comfortable on liquidity as well as a parentage. At least then our sense was when we were adding these companies and holding on to the existing names, they should have no problem lasting the downturn. And if you're an investor trying to build a portfolio, even now our our advice would be to stick to companies with very strong balance sheets and great pedigree. And if you get at valuations that you think are comfortable, please go ahead and add them to your portfolio. Certain sectors, we resize the weights, assuming there could be a hit on consumer discretionary spending in the near term. We booked profits recently, so our cash levels are again rising in certain because certain sectors are getting expensive. If the markets were to correct, we have fairly decent amount of cash, over 10% now in the portfolio. Again, because our long-term view remains positive, irrespective of near-term uncertainty, and we will go ahead and buy and deploy into the market with a sort of 5 to 10 year horizon. We believe India is a great story to remain invested with a slightly longer term view, but near term, you might have to mute your return expectations. What are the risks to our portfolio positioning? Right now, since you're positioning for an economic recovery, if the COVID crisis again sort of gets India into a second wave, it might slow down the economic recovery, and the cyclicals that we have in the portfolio might not rebound as sharply as we think. So there might be a longer slowdown, and the economic recovery might be weaker than what we think. There are already data points that CMI has put out that there has been significant job losses in the salaried class, which remain the primary driver of some consumption in India. If we continue to see job losses in that bucket, then consumer discretionary spend might not sustain and might drop, which again might hurt our portfolio a little. And government has to wake up. Like Arvind said, the government fiscal support has been very inadequate, and the government has to substantially increase the spending for the discretionary cycle to again pick up again. Our advice to investors has been that even though the index is close to an all-time high, like I said, the rally has not been broad-based. It has been a very, very concentrated rally driven by one stock, which is Reliance, and certain and there are opportunities beyond the index, so you might want to build a portfolio looking at the broader market index. Long-term outlook remains attractive, but near-term returns could be muted because price to earnings ratio now have set a high benchmark, and our higher price to earnings means the next few years returns could be muted. So if you're investing, have a slightly longer-term horizon, probably with more than 5 years of outlook. This is not the time to go over it on equities. You might want to be careful. Our advice is to remain neutral, about 75 to 100% of your long-term average. If you have SIPs running, then you should not touch them. SIPs by their nature are meant to average out these cycles. But if you are looking to allocate lump sum right now, then you need to be careful. You might want to stagger that investment, perhaps put 75% now, the balance 25% if the market were to give you another crack. Retail flows are showing some signs of nervousness, but FIIs continue to like India, and they might cushion some of the downside if India were to correct. In terms of equity allocation, we've always maintained you should have a basket of about 6 funds in your portfolio. So you can select these funds on your own, or you can invest 20% in Quantum Long-Term Equity Value Fund, the balance 80% in the Quantum Equity Fund of Funds, which sort of completes your investment baskets. You get an allocation of diverse styles. No matter how much we like Quantum Long-Term Equity Value Fund, because it's a value fund, it has certain return characteristics where in a frothy market where liquidity is fairly ample, it does not do well, and in a highly risk-averse market, it tends to do really well. So last 6 months has been really nice for us, despite not owning Reliance. We've caught up with performance, but if you look at the performance in 3 years prior to that, it has not been that great. So for you to balance those return cycles, 80% allocation to equity fund of funds, which has a diverse pool of funds, which does well when we don't do well, and vice versa, will give you a very balanced return and risk profile. We have launched something called the Quantum ESG Fund recently. Because it doesn't have a long-term track record, I've not included in this slide because I've shown the return profile of the strategy in the future, but it has had a very great track record over the last 12 months. So our advice right now, if you want to sort of broaden your investment basket and stick to the quantum family, then it would be 70% in Quantum Equity Fund of Funds, 20% in Long-Term Equity Value Fund, and 10% in Quantum ESG Fund. We are still recommending 10% because of it just over a year old. It doesn't have a long-term track record. So once we have a long-term track record, then we can perhaps size the investment a lot better. So this is the return profile of Quantum Long-Term Equity Value Fund and Equity Fund of Funds. So if you run an 80-20 strategy that we suggested, so last 1 year, Equity Fund of Funds has given a slightly positive return, while Quantum Long-Term Equity Value Fund has not. even a deep negative return. But then 80-20 strategy will give you a much more balanced return. So your returns are a lot more balanced, not a sharp variation as you would have experienced had you just been allocated to long-term equity value fund. And sort of the variability is also a lot lower compared to just being allocated to one strategy. So that's been our investment advice for a long time now, where you want to have sort of two funds in your basket. And the other thing is, the other way of playing a recovery is not just through equity, right? You must have a broad basket of asset allocation. We've always liked gold as an asset class. It tends to do really well when stress increases in the world. So the reason to invest in gold is not because of returns, but as a risk protection to your portfolio. So like in 2008, when the global financial crisis hit, gold really, so even if your equity portfolio did not do that well, gold did well and protected you in that environment. Similarly, in 2020, equity has not done that well, but gold again has shown through. Every time risk goes up, gold tends to do well. And if you run a balanced asset allocation strategy of equity, fixed income, and gold, you will have a much better sort of return profile with much lower risk. Not return profile, return equity, pure equity will give you much better, but at least a much lower risk profile, and will protect you in various cycles of the market. So that's sort of the return profile of equity, debt, and gold. This assumes a 40-40-20 allocation to equity, debt, and gold. Again, just under 11% CAGR with much lower volatility compared to pure equity allocation, and a much lower drawdown as well if you were invested in just pure equity. So people who are slightly more risk averse, this is a much better strategy. So we have something called a multi-asset fund, which sort of takes a view on allocation. And again, whenever it thinks equity allocations are expensive, it will increase allocation to fixed income. And whenever it thinks equity allocations are cheap, will increase the allocation to equity and lower the allocation to fixed income. And gold is a residual in the strategy. So this is a return profile of that. Again, much lower volatility and much lower drawdowns than you would expect in a pure equity strategy. Again, it's a great product for people who are slightly more risk averse. As you want to lower risk in your portfolio, you can move some of the money in multi-asset. A lot of investors have long-term money lying in fixed deposits, but doesn't give you much great return. Especially today, net of tax, they might yield you somewhere around 4%. So if you're the highest tax bracket, for them, multi-asset is a great product that they can invest in. Where much higher returns and much lower risk than a pure equity strategy. So that's sort of the end of my presentation. Ghazal, we can open the Q&A.
Thank you, Nilesh. Thanks to both of you for taking us to the presentation and for sharing your data-backed insights. We do have some questions for you, so let's get started with those. I'll start with Arvind. Arvind, while we anticipate a sharp economic recovery, is this sustainable and long-term, or would you say it's temporary?
So as I showed over the charts, there are certain structural problems which led us to that low growth phase prior to COVID also. And then as Nilesh mentioned, the government's response to supporting people's income and growth also has been pretty weak. So, if you look at it in this way, the government put people out of jobs because of the lockdown. They had to do it. It was necessary. But hasn't compensated those people with that income and lost income and lost wages. So if you put both together, you will see recovery. But what I will caution people is you will see a lot of talks about normalizing, that economy is normalizing, data points are normalizing. You have to benchmark it against what are you expecting. If your expectation is 4% GDP growth, sustainable, then of course things will normalize. It will be better than that. If your expectation was 8% GDP growth, then I don't think we are normalizing to that extent. So you will see data points positive, YOY data of practically every data point will show in a good positive. And over the next 6 months, as economy opens up more and more, you will see that happening. But what is normal in today's world is very important to ask. If the normal GDP growth is not 6.5, but say 5.5, that I think is sustainable. You will be able to see a sustainable growth. As Nilesh said, India is at the end. India is a micro story. So multiple entrepreneurs, multiple people, they get into the job, they find jobs, they do their work, and that drives economic growth. Policy reforms from the top have to take place. So because we came into COVID itself with a lot of weakness, that's why we sort of lowered our FY23 to FY25 GDP growth estimate to below our potential of 6.5. So we say 5.5 for the next between FY23 and 25, and then and after that we'll go back to 6.5. In between, you might see a recovery, and then if India also faces a second wave, God forbid, and then you'll again see economic data points going down. So the sustainability is very it has to be seen from what is your long-term sustainable growth, and we think that number has come down for the time being.
Sure, thanks. Nilesh, are we headed in for a recession? If yes, have the markets discounted for this?
Yeah, I mean, Arvind said, I mean, recession, I mean, there's a traditional recession where demand drops and business cycles turn for the worse, and we are not heading into that direction. Right now, it's a forced lockdown which triggered a collapse in economic activity, and once things open up, we will bounce back. So we're not heading into a recession, but like Arvind said, we could be heading into a period of subpar growth. So our long-term estimates for GDP was 6.5%. At least for next 3-4 years, we could settle at a slightly lower GDP growth. But our sense is we will bounce back from whatever carnage that we've seen in Q1 and Q2 of the economy. We're already seeing data points in September getting a lot better. That is inflated because it's a combination of pent-up demand and festive buying. But our sense is we will recover, but probably settle down at a growth rate which is slightly lower than what we've seen historically.
All right, thanks. Arvind, the next question is for you. Over the next 1 year, along with equities, what is the outlook for debt and gold?
Okay, so debt is, if you look at the broad basket of debt, and most people have money invested in fixed deposits, right? That's a very high allocation. You should expect returns to be lower. Fixed deposit interest rates will remain low. The RBI has reduced interest rates to its multi-decade level, like 3.5% is the reverse repo rate. Most fixed deposits are between 5 and 6%. Even though data points will show that the economy is recovering, if inflation does not rise, the RBI will keep interest rates low to allow the economy more time to recover, and from a cyclical recovery, make it a structural recovery. So they'll keep interest rates low. So from that, you should expect, your interest rates to be low. People will have tendency to, I'm getting a public sector fixed deposit at 6%. Can I buy an NBFC at 9%? I want to earn that extra 1-2%. As I showed in that default chart, till the time the growth is structurally in an uptrend, we've been cautioning and we've been telling people to avoid any kind of credit risk. So don't try to earn that extra 1-2% in a scenario like this today, where the economy has been weak. There are multiple data points. Corporate India is still not out of woods. So keep your return expectations from debt as low as you can, and keep it as safe and as liquid as you can. On gold, there's no point of giving a price outlook, as we've always said that gold is in some sense, a portfolio insurance, right? So you always need to have gold in your portfolio, and we've said that if you're investing in gold for investment purpose, then don't do jewelry, do gold ETFs. And Chirag, and you have written about sovereign gold bonds also recently, depending on if you're a long-term investor or short-term. So gold should be a part of your portfolio. It's a hedge against central banks going crazy. It's a hedge against governments going crazy. It's a hedge against policymakers going crazy. So, there's no need that you should always have gold in your portfolio, depending on, what risk profile and what business you're in, 5, 10, 15, 20%. But you should have that at all times.
Sure. Thanks, Arvind. So Arvind, you shared your views on the role the government has played in the economic recovery. So what do you think? How do you think the government can further aid economic recovery? What would you say to that?
We've been very, very shocked and surprised on the government response. They've done certain good things, free food, Manrega, increase in Manrega, but they could have done a lot more and it wouldn't have cost them much. So, today we have Jandan, so 40 crore bank accounts. They wisely chose women bank accounts, so 20 crore women bank accounts. They gave 500 rupees for the first 3 months, 1,500 rupees. That's very little. That's the amount of incomes and wages that people have lost. That 1,500 rupees is not much. And
Sure.
they've been trying to time the recovery. They're trying to time the stimulus package so that whenever they give money, people go out and spend and do not save. I don't think that's the right way to say it. I think it's a moral issue, right? You've taken people away from jobs and not allowed them to work, and you're not compensating them with money. I think the government could have spent a lot more, another 75,000 to 1 lakh crore of money in this using the same Jandan, transferring for another 7 months. That same 500 rupees you would have done for another 7 months. So 10, 12 months of money going into the bank account of people. Wouldn't have been enough, but at least would have had some buffer for people to go and take risk, because people will save when they are very unsure. If they have some money, some level of margin of safety, they will go and take risks to earn more income or get more jobs. I think I think they should do. They can talk about capex and long-term industrial capex and capital expenditure, which is good. But right now the problem is income. People's incomes have gone down, and you need to buffer that up and take that up. So there are arguments that India cannot afford it. I don't believe it. I mean, RBI, along with the support of the RBI and the markets, the government could have easily afforded at least this 75,000 to 1 lakh crore of extra money being put in the hands of people. Use the same women Jandan accounts. It's easier to monitor, it's easier to deliver. We have the technology, we have the ability. We just need the intention to do it.
All right, thanks. Nilesh, the next question is for you. Which sectors would you say are standing out as attractive to invest in the current market scenario?
Yeah, so like I said, the market rally has been sort of strange, where it's driven by the large weight in the benchmark, which is Reliance and IT and pharma. X of that, valuations still remain fairly attractive. So you look at financials, you look at consumer discretionary, they are still well below the highs that we saw before the COVID crisis. So at least when you look at our portfolio, our largest weight right now is financial services, and the second largest is consumer discretionary. That is where we think valuations are very attractive. One of the other large weights that we've been carrying for a while is utilities. Unfortunately, because a lot of them are public sector undertakings and the government has not been kind to them in terms of new share offerings and just the amount of supply that is coming in from these companies. But if you look at the valuations, most of them are trading at sort of 6% dividend yield, 7% dividend yield, deep discount to book value. So whenever things slightly normalize, you might have some value unlocking in that bucket as well. These are the sort of three pockets where we are positioned right now and where we think there is an opportunity to make decent returns over the next 2-3 years.
Sure. Nilesh, in your presentation, you spoke about Quantum's equity funds. Can you elaborate further on the ideal allocation between the funds?
Yeah, so I mentioned that in our presentation, right? So before the launch of ESG fund, we would recommend 80% in quantum equity fund of funds and 20% in long-term equity value funds to get a diverse bucket. We launched the ESG fund, which has a very basic concept behind it, which is if you're a well-governed company, you will do a lot better than other companies who are not that well-governed, and especially if you're meeting a lot of parameters on environment norms and social norms. So over a longer period of time, these companies will do a lot better. But we wanted to see the track record of that fund before we started recommending. And they've actually had a fantastic one-year track record, much ahead of the benchmark as well as the other funds in the industry. So right now we are a bit more confident, but we still recommend a small allocation. So right now our ideal allocation is about 70% in quantum equity fund of funds, 20% in long-term equity value fund, and 10% quantum ESG fund. The reason we still are recommending just 10% despite the great 1-year track record is it needs to generate a long-term track record. So you still be careful and watch it closely. But this is what we are recommending in our equity funds right now as ideal allocation for investors.
Thanks, Nilesh. Arvind, what are your views on a multi-asset strategy? Would you say this is a good time to invest in a balanced or a multi-asset fund?
Oftentimes, even when I speak to my own friends, some are in the finance field, some are not in the finance field. They don't know much about the market. They don't track it, and I see them struggling with their investment allocation. They will just decide if I tell them something, or if they will choose an advisor, or they'll just follow some random whatever they hear. But there's no discipline. There's no discipline in terms of how they want to allocate. So in our path to profits, we speak about goals, right? So you have specific goals in your mind, and for each specific goal, you try to make an investment plan. That's when asset allocation really matters. And that one reason Quantum launched the multi-asset fund was to address that issue, that people struggle with their allocation. They don't know when to buy equities, when to sell equities, when to buy debt, when not to buy debt, how much should you have in equities, in gold. And the other reason was all of us have way too much money in fixed deposits. And although we might do 1-year FDs and 3-year FDs, we tend to roll it over. So it becomes a fairly long-term 8, 9, 10-year investments in a fixed deposit product, which, as Nilesh said, after tax does not generate a very high level. It saves you from volatility, but does not generate very high return. In that aspect, you don't know what to do, and the fact that you're leaving too much money in fixed deposit than what you require is your asset allocation. So you should have allocation to equities, you should have allocation to debt and gold. And if you can't do that, then just put your money in what are called hybrid funds, right? Multi-asset funds or hybrid asset allocation funds. I will caution against the hybrid, whatever used to be called the earlier balanced funds, because in that the equity allocation tends to always be above 65%. And I don't know how that is balanced. That's not balanced, right? So you are a FD investor, and you like the risk profile of an FD investing. And if you invest in a balanced fund which has 65% equities, the risk profile is very different. So you have to choose asset allocation funds which have a medium allocation to equities, and then leave it to the fund manager to time when the fund manager wants to be in equity. So if you saw that multi-asset slide, the Chirag is actively taking calls on how much equity allocation the multi-asset fund should have and how much it should not have, and then balancing it with debt. And there is a standard allocation to gold at all points of time. I think that has a lot of value. It solves people's problem of, trying to earn slightly more returns than fixed deposit to beat inflation, and be very disciplined about it and not worry about it. Not worry about the noise that equities have cracked 30% and gold has gone up 30%. If you remain invested in that asset allocation, quite a lot of your investing problems will get solved.
Wonderful. Thanks, Arvind. Nilesh, I have a very interesting question for you. What do you think will be the after effects of the pandemic on investor behavior? Will investors become more conservative, or are they going to leverage this opportunity?
Investor behavior, it really depends. I mean, I expect people who've come in the last 3-4 years and who've seen a large cut in their investments, perhaps might shy away from equities in the near term. You might, see them withdrawing once they get back their cost. And second is, they might shy away from investing altogether in equities for a while. But long-term investors will continue to allocate. I mean, there is no reason for the long-term investor to shy away from. Yeah, like I said, there is a big long-term story of allocation to equities in India because they are so underinvested. They expect more and more people, as they get more aware about investing in equities, for that money to come in. But if you want to ask me the reaction of just the pandemic and what it will cause, I expect some people might become cautious, and the money that we've seen, the kind of inflow that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, perhaps the next couple of years, it might be little bit less than what we've seen historically.
if I can answer.
Sure. Thank you, Nilesh.
No,
If I can also-
Yeah, sure, Arvind, you can add.
So if you look at the impact of the pandemic, high income people who've been able to keep their jobs haven't had work which is physical work outside, so they've been able to work from home, have actually seen an increase in savings, right? We've not gone for our vacations. We've not bought too many apparel. We've not spent a lot of money traveling around, looking at movies, going out. So there is a pent up saving in that section. It's a small segment in terms of the overall population, but the spend potential will be high. And then there are people who have just lost income, and that's a very big number, absolute as well as in terms of impact. We've seen, as Nilesh said, and this across the world, people going into direct equities. In the last 3-4 months, you've seen retail equity flows picking up. We don't know their behavior. I mean, if tomorrow Trump doesn't win and Biden wins and markets sees it something different, and global equity markets crack by 15-20% again, or there's a very bad second wave across Europe, and you've seen that over the last 2 days, they've actually most of the European countries have gone into lockdown, and that causes a crack. How do investors behave? There are a lot of short-term investors when you're investing directly. It's not equity mutual funds have seen outflows, but retail inflows have increased. That will be an interesting thing to see how people react to that.
All right. Thank you, Arvind. Thank you, Nilesh. With that, we've come to the end of the Q&A.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.